Sophie, I'm a social worker, and I've recently started to use vlogging as a way of communicating with other social workers and also to use it as a platform to discuss current social work issues. The process of vlogging's made me really think about my own social work career and what I've learnt along the way, and it's brought me to the time in my career when I was a newly qualified social worker. My first job as a newly qualified social worker was in 2008, and I worked for a team called the Referral and Assessment Team. And its function was to take referrals and respond to those referrals. So it could be that I was completing a social work assessment or a child protection investigation, and in the more serious cases, a child protection investigation alongside the police. And you can imagine it was a fairly overwhelming environment and a challenging first job. I was really lucky because my last university placement had been in a very similar team, so I had experience of completing similar work, but nevertheless it was challenging to start in. My first memories of going into the office were just visually loads of files on desks just piled up, lots of people on the phone, a really frenetic sense of people working very hard, lots of typing. And I just thought, oh my gosh, this is going to be busy. And it was very busy. But I was very lucky because within my first team, I had the most incredibly supportive, nurturing manager who had so much time for me. She was a real salt of the earth manager. Her door was always open, her phone was on late into the night, and you could call her if you were on a late visit, and she always wanted to know that things were okay. And I think her level of support gave me the passion that I still have today about social work. And what I also found was that her really positive way of managing had a real impact on the team, so they were able to lend me lots of support and learning opportunities as well. And when I see situations now where newly qualified social workers don't get the same level of support that I did, I feel very frustrated and saddened, because actually often newly qualified social workers could really thrive if they had the same level of support that I did. And it's not something that should be tolerated ever by a newly qualified social worker. One of the other things that is when I started as a newly qualified social worker, I looked and I was incredibly young. And I think that must have been really challenging for service users when I turned up at the house. I always remember one of the first visits I ever did was to a family and their 5-year-old daughter. And her question to me with wide eyes was, "Are you an adult?" And I was really taken aback by the question. I just wasn't expecting it. I had thought about how adult service users might respond to me, but I hadn't really considered a child being confused about my identity or status. But it was a really good example of when you're given a question and you don't really know how to respond, use it as part of your work. So it gave me an opening about how I could explain who I was and why I was in the house. And that's something that I took forward in my practice, is using the unexpected to help me form relationships with the family as well. Another really big part that I found difficult when I first started was understanding and putting in thresholds for families. So I'd go out and do the assessment, but I wasn't always sure what the information that I gathered meant. And again, going back to my really fantastic manager, she helped me with that enormously in supervision. And one of the biggest things she taught me that I still carry on to this day in my practice is when you go to supervision, make sure you go in with a plan. It doesn't have to be the right plan, but at least it's a way of discussing the case and finding a different path with your manager. So that was a fantastic learning experience, and that manager really taught me what good supervision should look like as well. Another really difficult part when I started was actually learning how to cope with the traumatic aspects of the practice. And I remember very early on, I think it was perhaps in my first or second week, I had my first encounter with a service user who was really unhappy with me. And he showed his unhappiness by shouting and becoming not physically aggressive, but very much in my face. And I perhaps at that time didn't have the skills to know how to cope with that situation, not just at the time, but also afterwards coming away from it. It really challenged my confidence, and I spent the whole weekend not being able to sleep. And I think moving forward, I've learned an awful lot from other social workers in that team and in subsequent teams about how to manage conflict in difficult situations. And I hope, and I think I have definitely got better at managing really challenging situations and not letting it make me not sleep for a whole weekend. But it still does affect you, and it's really difficult. But thinking back, I know just how emotionally challenging it could be, and it really did impact me to start with. But again, using supervision and my manager, I was able to talk through how I was feeling and acknowledge that I was finding that part of the work really difficult. And I think that's the key point, is within your social work career, you're forever developing social work skills. It's not just that you learn it as a newly qualified social worker and you're there ready to go and take it into the world. Every day, everything you do, you learn something new, and I think you have to be open to those experiences and acknowledge that you don't know everything and be susceptible to people teaching you new things. And I think my experience within that team taught me that, to be an open person who's willing to learn at every point. So in terms of the first job, that is a thing that I will always take through in my career, that sense of learning.